Recording. Excellent. All right, so what I've done, there's a couple things I want to go over before I start class. And one has to do with the final exam. So our final exam is on a Wednesday at 7:30. And I don't know if you guys remember me talking about the final exam early on in the semester when we still had class. Does anyone remember that? Okay, I'll go over it briefly. So basically, what normally happens is in class, you're divided up into groups, you're given a case study with a bunch of questions to answer, and written out the way we do like discussion groups. So it's very specific questions with the lines there, so your answers are limited. And you have as much time as you need, but it usually takes about half an hour, max 40 minutes for you to meet in your group, come up with the answers, and then you just present it back to the class. So there is a way I can do that on Zoom where I can have everybody on the screen and then break you up into groups. Jane, you looked into it because you sent me the email. So yeah, I know your mouth is full, but do you want to explain briefly how it works?
So you guys will all be in the Zoom call, and then Jamie will set it up so that you'll all go off into your designated groups and have your own little separate Zoom call. They're called breakout groups. And then you can also call Jamie over so she can go in and talk to you guys and answer questions if you have them. And that's essentially it, is that you'll be able to go off into your own little calls and have your group discussion.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email and try and emphasize that you can just reply to me so that you're not replying to the whole class. But I can tell you in class, like I've said before and Jane has said, it is the simplest and most fun final you could ever hope for. And I think you could still have a lot of that dynamic if we do it on Zoom like Jane just described. If you can't be on Zoom, you will have a similar test, but it will be on Blackboard, and you will be doing it on your own because you can't collaborate with the way Blackboard sets up exams. So I just want you guys to think about that. I'm going to keep it in the same time slot so that that's not an issue for anybody, like I had to work or whatever. It's Wednesday at 7:30 p.m., whatever the week is after classes. So just think about it. And what I'm going to probably do is, for anyone that has not been on any of the Zoom classes, they'll have to take it on Blackboard because they haven't had any of the continuity that you guys have had. But for anyone that's attended at least 2 of the 3 TMP classes in particular, I might consider 2 out of the 4, including pharmacology. But if you're not comfortable doing this or able to do this, then like I said, I'm just going to send out an email to get a count of people. I can tell you, and I think Jane would agree, you'll do a lot better and it'll be a lot easier if you do it on Zoom as a group, but I can't force you to do that. And yes, the grading's a little easier for Jane and I if we do it online, but it's not significantly different. So it's really just something for you guys to think about what you prefer. So I just wanted to say that ahead of time. And again, being on the Zoom classes in my mind, makes a much bigger difference because at least there's some interaction. I'm adding to the notes you read, etc. So you don't have to give me answers now, but any questions?
Are we still gonna come back together and present like we would if we were in class, or are we just gonna break out?
No, you'll break out into your groups. And then what happens, and this is part of the advantage of doing it on Zoom, is basically you read your case study and the first 2 questions are, what are the 2 primary problems you need to address? And one semester I had a group who picked 2 completely wrong things. And this is a few years back. And then unfortunately, everything else they followed was wrong. So now what I do is I have you answer those 2 questions, check in with me, make sure they're correct. And then if they're correct, you go back and continue. And then we all come back together as a group, each group presenting together, but everybody listening to it.
Okay.
And so that's how it works. And like Jane said, I'll be here the whole time, as will Jane, to answer any questions you have as you're doing it. And it's all open book, which means you can have your notes next to you. You can all do that. You can collaborate on that. On Blackboard, the disadvantage is you don't, even if you print out your notes, you don't really have time to use them, which means a lot more memorization for anyone that doesn't do it on Zoom. And I'm not like trying to make it harder for people that don't do Zoom. I'm just saying that based on how the exam is, that's the way I'm going to run the final, as opposed to writing an exam that were like your regular exams, where it's just, multiple choice, true, false, etc. Because those exams they don't allow for a culmination of, did you really learn what you wanted, what I hoped you learned over the course? Any other questions? Okay, so what I'm doing for tonight, I have notes next to notes, and I don't think class will go much longer than it did last week, but if it starts to get long, we can always end class, and then if you have further questions on the documents, you can ask them. Sometimes actually in class on regular semesters, I don't get through all the information and I just post it and then do exactly that next class. Okay, what questions do you have from what you read? Because this stuff last week, this week, and next week is pretty much essential, along with the pharmacology, but that's mostly self-explanatory. But this is the bulk of what you need to know to pass your final, and it's also the bulk of the information that will help you help people. So the first couple things to remember, I know you read this, are...
Amy, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I wasn't able to, I don't know if anybody else had this issue too, but when I clicked the link on Blackboard, it said that I needed to request to get permission, I guess.
Yes. So what I don't know if you got the Word document, which I only sent out a few hours ago.
Yeah, I think it was that one.
You couldn't open the Word doc either?
No. I couldn't
Okay.
open the videos or the Word doc.
Did anybody else have trouble opening the Word doc? Did everybody else get the Word doc and able to read it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure why, I know I only sent it out a few hours ago. What'll happen now is if you reply to the email that the links come from, you will get in bright purple letters a reply that says, this email will not be read. It's an email account I never check. And I actually went into it today because I was looking for, I'll email myself pictures or videos to that. That's a drive we use for UVM, our UVM class. It's not a UVM thing, but that's the easiest way for me to work with my teaching assistants and to keep track of stuff. And I even had Mihaela at my side, and I'm like, are you sure this is going to work with the videos? And she said yes, and she said yes with the link. And then it wasn't until today that I happened to open the emails, and I had probably at least 2 or 3 emails from most of you guys in class. So one, when I send you any written materials, it will now always be in a Word doc. And with the links, I'm not sure what went wrong. So what I did for tonight is the 2 videos of auto resource guiding, I'm going to screen share. And they were really hard to get to play. Like, we couldn't download them, somehow managed to open them in a new window, and they seemed to work. And those are the links I sent you. I have them ready to share, and I was able to watch them. So hopefully that'll work. There was another video I wanted to send. And the person who texted it to me, I asked her to email it to me. And if I can see it via email, then I will forward it to all of you. But it's about it's another one about resource guarding, but it has a lot more body language in it. It has a lot more about what you should be doing and what she did wrong. It was after I'd done a video consult. It's also a golden puppy. So I know none of you got to watch the videos, and like I said, I'll try and screen share them. They're not essential. I mostly put them in because just to break up all the reading. So hopefully we'll see the videos when we get to resource guarding, and I'll see if I can post them in the future. I'll probably test it on like sending it to Jane or something. But I'm less worried about that than making sure next week I will convert the Google Doc to a Word doc, and then I think you'll all get it. Does that sound reasonable and make sense? Thank you, Rex. Thank you, appreciate it. Any other questions? Okay, so I have notes in different places. Some of the sections I'm going to cover in more detail than others. But so with protective aggression and stranger aggression, I think a lot of that was really straightforward. And some of it we talked about last week in terms of, oh God, I didn't write this part down. Hang on. What is it? I think I gave one case study about stranger aggression. I know in here I did with Hank, the whole story about Hank. Did you get a chance to read that? Did that kind of give you a sense of how you might work with things? So one of the things, you know, you want to think about, and this comes up primarily with territorial aggression, but I didn't stress this very much in the very beginning section about the protective, stranger, territorial. A lot of times, if you're just dealing with stranger aggression in the home, you know, it's not like you walk your dog or you're trying to take it hiking. Like a lot of the people you deal with live more like family lives. And so they're not faced with triggers all over the place. And let's say they say, but I love taking my dog to Pet Food Warehouse. It's a local pet supply store, you know, but the only other time they really have their dog out is at home. And my answer to that is stop taking your dog to Pet Food Warehouse. Because, excuse me, because the work you would have to put in to train that dog in that tight of an environment usually isn't worth it. And if people are like, no, I really want to do it, I'm fine with that. And I'll get them started. And normally on their own, they'll either try and speed up the training and it doesn't work. And then they contact me and I'm like, well, did you do blah, 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 blah? And they're like, no, I just did, you know, I started in the back of the parking lot, then I went to the middle of the parking lot, then I went inside. And I'm like, okay, well, you need to break it down more. And most people then are just like, oh my God, that's so much work. And I'm like, yeah, and your dog probably doesn't love going into Pet Food Warehouse anyway. So sometimes it's best to just, you know, basically discourage people from those very specific, really unnecessary outings. I did want to talk more about territorial aggression. The most common places you're going to see it is in a person's house and yard, if they have it, and in the car. So one of the nicer things, so to speak, about territorial aggression is, as opposed to stranger aggression, whether it's protective or not, you got to walk your dog, you know, you've got to take your dog into the vet's office, you might have visitors in your home. And so normally the protective and the stranger, you are dealing with a variety of scenarios. With territorial aggression, you're usually dealing with a very limited number of areas, and the training is still the same, but the fact that you're only dealing with very few situations limits the whole thing of like, make lists, find out what all the triggers are. Everywhere the owner goes, they need to have dog eyes. They need to be looking for those things. When you're dealing with territorial aggression, usually you're dealing with the house, and therefore your critical distance becomes upstairs in a faraway room when someone comes to the front door. And unless you live in a mansion, decreasing that critical distance is a more exacting thing. You know, you're starting, I think we talked about this with the general, right? where you're starting in the back of the house. Did I go over that? Yes, no, maybe? I did. Okay, so you're dealing with a much more limited situation. I dealt with some people many years ago. They had a dog that looked like a big terrier mix. His name was George. He died like 3 years ago and he was 14, and I dealt with them when he was young, and they had adopted him. So this is like a bazillion years ago, but they had 3 children, man and woman, married couple, 3 kids. And the piano teacher would come 1 day a week after school to train the kid to do the piano lessons. And the dog was impossible to control. If they put him up in a bedroom, he just barked and destroyed the dog. So basically what I did is I had them simulate situations, which I know we talked about last week. Thank you. And they were able to use themselves, but only on a limited capacity. And what I ended up doing was having them ask the piano teacher if she could do Saturday lessons for a few weeks. And sometimes one of the owners could come home from work early. And literally they started their critical distance. The piano was basically at the bottom of the stairs, just off to the side. And their critical distance was at the end of so you went up the stairs and there were 2 bedrooms to the right. And they just started in the open doorway of the 2nd bedroom. And within 2 sessions, they were at the top of the stairs. And then within just a few more sessions for each step, their critical distance was top step, second to top step, third to top step, etc. And when they got, about 4 steps up from the bottom, George got far more reactive again. So I had them back up. I had them increase the quality of treats, which you constantly need to tell people to do, no matter how many times you tell them. They're like, oh, I'll buy some store-bought treats. And I'm like, it's not going to work. You need steak, you need hot dogs, you need cheese. And basically within a month, the piano teacher was able to come over, the kids didn't have to do anything, and George was loose in the house. So sometimes when you've got that territorial aggression, it was really the only time the kids were home alone where somebody else would come in the house. So sometimes you get these relatively straightforward, simple cases. They're not always disastrous, horrible, I live in Philadelphia, I can't get away from people, that kind of thing. So a lot of what I described to you are many of the times worst case scenarios or very serious situations. But not all aggression takes place all the time, therefore reducing a lot of the intensity of the work. But that doesn't negate everything I said last week about dogs that bite people die and how serious you need to take it. I did want to talk about car training. So if you have a dog that goes ballistic when it sees people from the car, training usually can take place twofold. One, an owner can do it alone by taking their dog to a parking lot, a big parking lot with very few people driving their cars in and out, where they can park far away. And they use the same parking lot critical distance, but just by having a big parking lot with very little traffic, and then switch, either moving closer, and they might see 1-2 cars in a 20-minute training session. And it's exactly the same process of feed. If your dog's overreactive, you're too close, or if suddenly the parking lot gets busy, you need to leave. But that is a way where an owner can work alone with a dog. If you're doing it while you're driving, you have to have 2 people. I have had situations where I discourage this, but if you don't drive a stick shift, so if you drive an automatic, which is what most people do, you can take a jar of peanut butter and hold it over your shoulder while you're driving with your other hand. And that is one way, but I know it's not always very safe. But if you're in a place where the person feels like that's safe, it's not like texting on a phone. I've done it before. And the dog, it's going to want to put its head up between the front seats to try and bark and aggress at whatever it sees, or the side windows in the back seat. But usually if you have something and you hold it back there and the dog will lick it. So if the dog's, you know, it aggresses at people on the sidewalk in the car. So you try and drive in areas where there's not tons of people, but when you're driving down a road like Williston Road or Shelburne Road, the dog's got to be in the car. You just basically hold your peanut butter cup back there while you're driving, and it often works. Then if that works, you can advance to, when you get in the car, have 5 stuffed Kong toys, put peanut butter in one, put cream cheese in one, put, you know, like liver pate kind of stuff, like Spam, stuff that's like greasy and sticky, as opposed to things that will fall out. And you just keep tossing the dog Kong toys while you're driving, and then you don't give it very much dinner if you give it dinner at all. So those are some techniques for territorial aggression in cars, which is a pretty common issue with many people. Okay, I know we're doing questions at the end, but I did want to know if anybody had questions about the differences in treatment for protective, stranger, or territorial aggression. Okay. Predatory aggression, I know like a lot of this, I rewrote a bunch of it so that hopefully it was mostly self-explanatory. But hang on. Predatory aggression, some of the things you need to think about are that for many dogs, predatory aggression is innate and genetic. And if you have a dog that is genetically predisposed to very strong predatory behaviors, you may not be able to fix it without restraint. And that sometimes is just a fact that people have to face. So for example, I think I told you guys about Lentil and the woodchuck. Yes, no? You know, I'm never gonna if Lentil sees a woodchuck out in the woods, he's gonna take off. So I've been hiking him. I try and restrict his hikes to a couple of fields that have a fair amount of open view, as opposed to in the woods where it's much harder to see him. And right now, all of the grass is the exact same color as Lentil. So I put an orange, like what you use in hunting season, a big orange collar around his neck. Makes him much easier to see. And I take him to mostly to the 2 same places. And there's woods that we go through, but there's a lot of open field. And day before yesterday, he went over a knoll, and he usually will go out of sight for half a minute or a minute, but his come is impeccable. And I'm sure he saw a chipmunk or a mouse or something, and he was gone for about 35, 40 minutes. And I know everything. Well, I know a ton about how to find lost dogs. I've actually helped a lot of people through it. And what I found really interesting was that even with what I know, it was so hard for me to do what I knew the right thing to do was. So basically, when you lose a dog like that, you stay where you are. You kind of like, I was with my partner, and we went up different directions, but up the same knoll to look over. And he was north and I was south. We didn't see anything. And so then I went back to the exact spot I was standing in when I last saw Lentil. And it took everything in me to move, because almost always dogs will return to your starting place. So if you've driven to a hiking trail, your dog's most likely, or you've driven to a friend's house, your dog's most likely to go back to your car or your friend's house. And if you're within relative distance of your own home, or if you've left from your own home, that's where you're most likely to find the dog. And it took me 20 minutes to move towards the house, or more than 20 minutes. Standing there going, Jamie, go to the house, go back to the house. That's where you left from. That's where he'll be. There's also a yurt up on the property that we were on. And so I knew he could be at the yurt, which is in one of the fields. But so I was like, just go to the yurt. If he's not there and you really desperately need to, go back to the knoll. But when I got to the yurt, I could actually hear him barking down at the house. That was my partner's house. But I could hear him. And so, of course, I went running down the hill. And then you can see the road because his house is on the main road, the paved road. And of course, Lentil chases bicycles. And all of a sudden, I see 2 bikes go by with Lentil in tow. But that was after I already heard him back at the house. That predatory aggression is a risk that I will take or keep him on leash for the rest of his life. Given where I live, and if I restrict him to a couple of places versus taking him on the big hikes with the other dogs, I would be far more concerned about losing him. And because of his tracheal issues, I can't keep him on a leash no matter what harness I buy. He hacks the whole time. So at this point in his life, I can't change that predatory aggression. I feel like the cun that I have is far better than I thought I'd get, but that's just an example of it is innate, it's genetic, and there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, I can still work on that cum over and over again, and I do, and that made a big difference from last summer when I'd first gotten him, but it doesn't change that innate behavior will always exist. Huskies are a good example of, they're escape artists, and 2, I've never known a husky that wouldn't kill a cat if it could, indoors or outdoors. And while they weren't bred to be, to take down other animals or to do rodent control, that just exists in the breed. And then you look at other animals that may not be what you would think of as predatory, but if you look at Rhodesian Ridgebacks, they were bred to hunt, and either if there were a pack of them, to circle a lion and hold it till the hunter could shoot it, or if there were only 1 or 2 of them, they would often, their job was to kill the lion. And I've known, every Ridgeback I've known has been aggressive, both towards humans and towards other animals, but particularly towards other animals. And I've found that you can acclimate them to, say, 1 other dog in the house, but forget having them off leash where, my attitude is, if I'm out in the woods and my dog catches a chipmunk, personally, I'm like, fine, that's nature. But if my dog's gonna chase that chipmunk and disappear, it's a problem. So, you get a breed like a Ridgeback, which you wouldn't normally think of as having a high prey drive, but they really do, in that they were bred to take down lions. And to me, that seems like a pretty tenacious dog, and that's why most of them are not super friendly. Hang on, see my notes. Okay, I'll give you another more atypical breed predatory aggression behavior. So I board this Newfoundland Ziggy. If you are on my Facebook page, the dog school Facebook page, you may have seen him. Big black Newfie. He lives about 1/2 or 3/4 of a mile from here, and he is horrible about chasing bicycles. The dog has no other issues. I've really never worked with a Newfie that had those kind of issues, but they adopted him when he was 2. So, who knows what his previous life was like. And I try to bring him every semester to canine behavior. And what I do, and I have done, Jane, you've been in classes with him, right? So what we do is I find a student in the class who has a bicycle. And then you bring your bike to class, and we go out with Ziggy. And if you go out the back entrance that's next to Davis as opposed to out towards the green. So we go out there, and because Ziggy is huge and weighs far more than I do, I learned after the first experiment of this that I have to take his leash and wrap it around the metal bike rail or handrail, because otherwise I just can't control him. And pretty much nobody can. I suppose some, a big enough person probably could. But so what I did is I would have the student be, further back, kind of past, what is it, the environmental studies building, I'm forgetting what it's called. But they have a ton of steps going up to the one entrance, but there's also the bike ramp that goes further towards, I can't remember the name of the building. Marsh Life, is it?
Oh, Aiken is also up there.
So like back further away, and as long as all I have to, if Ziggy's not looking, I would just have you go like, hey, and Ziggy's gonna look, and he lunges and he barks, and we get the bicyclist to move far enough away doing critical distance, and we train him. And then usually within one training session, even though I do it once a semester, we can have Ziggy at the rail and have somebody go up and down the ramp that's against the building. And even one semester, a student was able to go right on the lawn, maybe 15, 20 feet from him. When the owners told me about the problem, they told me that they would go down to Burlington and they would stay in the car with him in the parking lot. And his reactivity never got low enough. And the problem was that they were too close to people riding down towards the boathouse. They needed to be in a more isolated area where they could still see bikes. Or I suggested that they try moving further away, like more towards the King Street docks. So they were further away from the boathouse where they'd still see bikes. And that's just another example of it is predatory aggression, even though you're dealing with a Newfoundland, and you find your critical distance. And by being with me, the owners never came, and it's too dark out to video, but the owners never brought him. But I never really thought much about it. But like if I use them next semester, probably having them watch me do it and having a bicyclist where I've set up the scenario would give them a good sense of how you work with that. Any questions? And I did absolutely everything I could not to have a stuffy nose, a sniffly nose, and it's not working. It's probably because there's so much dog hair in my bedroom that I choke when I breathe. An example of a predatory / hurting aggression behavior that we ended up deciding required no training. So years ago with my border collie Grace, the only people and dogs that Grace really, really loved were these friends of ours. They had a dog named Roxy. She was a black mutt. Roxy was like Grace, terrified of everything, terrified of people, terrified of her owner's cat. So the cat would terrorize Roxy. And at night, they would actually put the cat in a bedroom or in the cat room so Roxy would move freely around the house. Paul and Patty were the only people that could take care of Grace. And they also used to babysit Hallie when she was young. So we'd always bring Grace over. But if we were going away, I didn't leave Grace with my house sitter, with the rest of my dogs or my boarders. Grace went to Paul and Patty's because I knew that I could trust them with her human aggression issues. And Roxy wasn't aggressive, she was just terrified. But the behaviors expressed themselves much the same. And they loved having Grace at their house because Grace would herd the cat onto the dining room table and then keep it there. And it was the only time where Roxy would actually come out when the cat was there because Grace just wouldn't let it off the table. And I was like, well, we can teach her not to do that. And they're like, we love it. It's the best thing ever for our dog. So when you're evaluating situations, you don't always assume the worst. You find out what's really that problem for that person, as opposed to, okay, my dog herds and chases cats, I need to stop that. Also, I had cats, and the ideal situation is when the cat smacks the dog across the face and takes care of the problem itself. That's really the best situation. I mean, I had with Kobe, my first Shiloh, our cat Simon clawed him right here. Thank God, missed his eyeball. He was 9 weeks old. He had 10 stitches down his face. And to me, the worst part of it was the vet wouldn't neuter him because he was too young. I was like, he's under anesthesia, just neuter him now. But, other than that, because Kobe wasn't hurt, he didn't lose his vision or anything. The fact that he ended up with Simon correcting him, and at the time we had 3 cats, he never went near any of them. So I always will tell people if they're getting a dog or they call me and they're like, yeah, we got a dog, we're not sure it's okay with the cat. I'm like, will the cat go after the dog? Yeah, we're terrified of it. I'm like, let the cat go after the dog, because teaching dogs not to go after house cats can be a very difficult and long process. And that's where, when I talk about never let the chase happen, when you have an indoor situation like a dog and a cat, you have to keep your dog on leash the entire time that the cat could appear. Always. I worked with a boarding dog and I had him here for 9 months, and I had leashes in every room in my house. So if I was in the kitchen, I could hitch him to a leash. If I walked over to the dining room table, I could hitch him to that. If I walked into the living room, I could hitch him to that. And that alleviated me having him leashed to me all the time. But that was the best solution I come up with. And no, he never learned not to chase cats. I could have put a shock collar on him, but I wouldn't. He never could be house trained either. Ultimately his owners placed him. Okay, one thing I talked about, I believe in the same section, was about an emergency down. And I just wanted to explain that further and also let you know that it can be used in a variety of situations, in any aggression situation. If your dog might be likely to run after, you go out somewhere to run your dog in a field where you've never seen another person, and yet one day a person appears, or you want to be able to know you have control in the situation where you never hope you need it. In your house, outside of your house, in your driveway, on, walking your dog down the street. And an emergency down is basically you teach your dog that it drops the second you say down, as long as it's in visual distance. So this is my hand signal. It's just like raising my hand up high is my visual cue for an emergency down, which dogs can usually see sometimes more than they can hear you, particularly if it's like windy outside, or if they can hear me yell down. And you start by teaching a regular down stay, and you add in distance. And the hand cue that we usually use for down tends to be pointing down towards the ground because of luring them that way. So what you do is you're working your hand from down even lower than this, and you're slowly using the verbal down, 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 down. And the dog obviously has to respond to the verbal until you can get your hand all the way up with the verbal cue, and then you can drop the verbal cue and have one or the other. Sometimes it takes, like, you have to bring your arm down a little bit when you stop using the verbal. 10 laws of shaping: increase difficulty in one area, decrease it in another. But you can often do that so that the dog learns to drop anywhere, and then you bring it in close to you and you work with the distractions. So I taught both Grace and Brody emergency downs because of their levels of aggression in the areas they were, and I got them to the point where they could be way across the field, either one of them. And with Brody, if there was a dog, I would just yell down. And in those situations, I think it was Cole last week asked the question of, what do you do when you own an aggressive dog and you have it on leash and the other person doesn't have their dog on leash? And I'm yelling, and they're yelling, my dog's friendly. And I'm yelling, mine's not. And I have my dog on a leash, so it's not doing anything wrong. The off-leash dog comes running to my dog. My dog attacks the off-leash dog, and then I get ostracized by the owner who didn't have their dog under control. And because for me, running my dogs off leash is probably the equivalent to being able to eat. I mean, it's like number one on my list of what I like doing with my dogs. What provides me, it's the best therapy in the world for me. Running with my dogs is what kept me sane. It keeps me sane. I can hike now. It works, but it doesn't work as well as running. But to have that safety, even out where I live, the emergency down, if your dog will do it, I got both Brody and Grace to do it to the point where they could have loose dog, Brody could have loose dogs moving around him, on him, sniffing him, and he was like a statue. And I'll admit, it took over a year, and I trained my dog several times a day, every single day. Something that at that time in my life, I was, I think, 25 when I got Brody and 27 when I got Grace. I had all the time in the world. I didn't have a kid. I didn't have a house. I wasn't in a permanent relationship. My business was relatively new and less busy. And so oftentimes we need, I don't know if we talked about this with consults, and I'm straying slightly, but it's an important concept. Yet again, a thing that just doesn't, if it doesn't exist in my lecture notes, you guys haven't gotten it, is, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Well, and I know I was talking about the emergency down, the essentialness of it. Oh, so sometimes with the same problem behavior, you will deal with it differently. It kind of goes back to 10 forms, 10 similar forms with 10 different answers, because you'll be dealing with people who decide, oh, it's just way easier, I'll put up a fenced-in yard. Or you'll deal with people who are like, I'm not keeping the dog if it can't come on called off leash immediately. And I think I told you the story about the 2 Husky Shepherd mixes. Would have been early in the semester when I was talking about 10 different forms, 10 different answers. Yes and no's. Sort of. Okay. So I worked with these, when I had a training center, I did consults back to back because I didn't have to drive anywhere. And I had the most identical forms I could have imagined, excluding if I had had like litter mates with the identical family makeup. But it was man, woman, no child, both in both situations, adopted dogs that were half white German Shepherd and half Boomer, he was a Shepherd Husky mix. So they're both lab Shepherd Husky mixes. And they both came to me after the dog had bitten one person. And in the first consult, these people had a second dog. That was the only difference. And they hiked on these paths off leash in Richmond. Richmond's about 20 minutes from Burlington. And they were really upset because the new dog would run ahead and it was biting people. And I said, oh, we can work with this. You know, I evaluated the bites and that they weren't severe. The dog was mostly running up and biting and retreating. And, you know, pretty much not a super difficult case when it comes to aggression. And so I started talking about that and they're like, no, we're not going to keep our dog on leash during the training period. And I was like, well, you know, you're talking about maybe 2-3 months, 4 months. And then for the rest of this dog's life, you should be able to have it off leash. Absolutely refused, decided to return the dog the next day. So the other couple, again, the biting situation is slightly different. The man, Stuart, worked from home and he had an electrician came to the house and he brought the electrician in. Boomer met the electrician, everything was fine. The electrician got started on the work he needed to do. Stuart went upstairs to his office. The electrician went out to his van, came back in the house with more tools. Boomer bit him in the hand. Stuart's reaction when we talked about it was, oh my God, I am such an idiot. I never should have put the dog in that situation. And I was totally wrong and totally my fault. And we worked on his behavior. He was sometimes aggressive with people outside and they worked on it. And Boomer went on to live to be like 14 years old with a very happy life. And that's the kind of thing you face when you work with people, you know, and that, like I said, it's the closest I can come to 2 identical forms with 2 completely different outcomes. And so that's why every case is individual. Even though these are treatment protocols, you first have to evaluate how big is the risk? How frequent is the risk? Are there kids that are going to try and control this dog? And so on. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Groovy. Updating myself, but hey, it's 4:20, right? The section on body, thank you for your smiles. It's legal in Vermont, right? So I can say it. But I did not fail to recognize every single time I texted to you guys 420. So the body handling section, I just want to give you one case study, and I may have talked about this with Caper. So when I got Caper, he didn't particularly love to be pet, which isn't necessarily atypical of a border collie, but I could pet him and he wouldn't run away or freak out. The first time I took out a brush, he saw the brush at least 3 feet away from me, ran and hid. And I also, when in touching him, if I did much more than like his neck, he would run away. And so I was like, okay, I should work on this, but I was pretty lazy about it. And as he got older, he got more and more affectionate. But then I took him to the groomers because he had mats, he needed to be groomed. And what I didn't know was that his plumes, you all know what plumes are now? His plumes were completely matted. He had to be shaved down to the skin. I was so embarrassed. I was like, I said to this woman, Sherry, I'm like, I am so sorry. I know you deal with this all the time, but of all people, I should never have had my dog get in that condition. I should have brought him much sooner if I couldn't groom him. But I decided that I would work to get him to where I could pet him all over and I could brush him, possibly not clip his nails. I was willing to accept if I could never do that. And so this started last October, November, and I am now at the point where I can pet his entire body. I can do this in his plumes. I can do this in his mats, but he's developing mats behind his ears because I've still been getting my dogs groomed regularly and I can't right now. And if I go to, like, if I just even hesitate and touch that mat, like if I just gently feel it, even though I'm doing this and I'm scruffing up his ears, if I touch that mat, he is gone and he will not come out for at least half an hour. But I'm still working on it and I'm adding it. I can now kind of touch his tail. So I'm getting pretty much to the point where I can touch his whole body, and I'm brushing my other dogs a lot more because we're just sitting and watching TV at night. And that's always used to be really relaxing to me. And so Falcon, he's gone through phases of, yes, you can groom me, no, you can't. But now, like, steadily every night I'm working on him. And with Caper, what's been good is the brushes usually just stay out on the table. And it's, a low table in the living room, like a coffee table. And so Caper periodically will go over and sniff them. I know he's seen me grooming Falcon on the floor. But if I take a brush and I just put it on the floor and he sees me, he'll run away. Or if he walks in and there's a brush on the floor, he'll run out of the room. But my goal was that hopefully I would eventually be able to brush him with the expectation that it would take at least a year. And so sometimes desensitization can take a really, really long time. And that's why in the interim, my plan is to keep getting him groomed. And I know by the end of the quarantine, he's probably going to end up shaved on 3/4 of his body. I feel like a lot of the rest of the body handling is written out in extreme detail, as is the pain-induced aggression, because it's very similar to the body handling. So when we talk about resource guarding, I will now try and show you Otter at 9 weeks. And I will admit that I was kind of sort of, because my TA wanted to, seeing if Otter would bite her. So my TA at the time, her name's Renee, and they're pretty funny. So hopefully they will work, but I cannot guarantee it. Okay, here we go. So she's trying to retreat, which is a good sign. Okay, did you see it? Okay, so there's one more. It's equally as short, but this is the one where Renee actually gets bitten. Oh, wait, hang on. You guys couldn't see that, could you? Yes, no? Could you see the start of the second video? Okay, I didn't think so. Hang on. I don't know if it'll work or not, but we'll see. I think this is the second one, unless I... Watch Renee's right hand thumb. Okay. Like I said, the videos weren't major, but that was a puppy resource guarding at a very young age. And that was not training. I tried to demonstrate it in the class, but before I thought to videotape it at home, I had already spent probably 5 or 6 days working on it. And so I couldn't get her to resource guard with me. Fortunately, with a young puppy, it doesn't take much to train them to not be that way. And it often stems from, even from a good breeder, if they don't put out enough bowls for the puppies, so the puppies are surrounded around that bowl, all competing for the food, that can often lead to bringing home a puppy that resource guards. And Otter resource guarded toys and other things, but you should know that raw bones are usually the highest quality item a dog would guard that you would give to it. And sometimes if a dog does resource guard a lot of things, if the only thing left that they resource guard is raw bones, then I just tell people stop, just don't give them raw bones. It's just not worth it. Where you'll run into problems potentially, again, if you live rurally, is like in the fall, dogs around here will like find parts of deer all the time, because if a hunter has cut the deer up in the woods. Otter caught a chicken that was lost somewhere in the woods. This was a few months back. Ate it head first. Ate about 3/4 of it head first. Of all things, a golden retriever. And then yesterday, we don't know, I wasn't on the hike, so I don't know if she found the bird dead or alive, but she got a bird that was probably between the size of a robin and a pigeon. I couldn't tell what it was because all I could see was the beak and the tail. Mihaela took pictures. And again, in those situations, like my biggest concern is, okay, Otter just ate 3/4 of a chicken. Is she going to get sick? But those things become problems if the animals live in your home. So if you have caged pet birds or you have a house rabbit, you're often, if you don't have a dog to begin with and you want to add in a dog, you want to make sure that a person is looking at a breed that it is most likely to do okay with. So I wanted to talk about that in terms of resource guarding. Redirected aggression, which is the last type of aggression that we're going to talk about. One of the things that's not in my notes is that redirected aggression tends to happen when a dog is very agitated. So usually these are dogs that are revved up, and finally redirect their aggression. The story of me getting bitten, the worst case I've gotten bitten in with redirected aggression was I was caring for a friend's dog who had a lot of issues, but was fine with me, and she was fine with other dogs. And there's one hike we take where we leave by crossing my road up onto a private road, and we come back the same way. So on the way back, we leash all the dogs at a specific spot far enough away from my road so that they don't run ahead and potentially see somebody walking down the road, or a car could be coming down the road, even though, like, it's isolated. And so I'm coming down from the hike, and there's only so many dogs that need to be leashed. I probably had about 15 dogs with me, and I had 5 or 6 of them on leash. And I get to the point, I've got them all leashed, and I can see this guy ahead of me at the crossroads, and he's starting to walk towards me. And I'm yelling, and the dogs are going ballistic. I'm like, go away, please don't. And he's calling to me. I can't hear what he's saying. I'm like yelling, go away. So finally I start tying up the dogs that I can. And in the process, and then I only had 2 dogs on leash, and Wizard, she was what I usually refer to as farm collies. People often call them English shepherds, but they're really just generic herding dogs that are mutts, which are like the best herding dogs or farm dogs you can get. And she was just bolting at the end of the leash. Everyone else was tied up, and I didn't want to tie her up because I didn't have a place that I felt was safe and secure. I was worried she'd snap the leash. The guy finally stopped, but he's standing there yelling. And out of nowhere, Wizard is at the end of the leash, just fully aggressing. And out of nowhere, she just turns around and nails me in the thigh. And I was wearing shorts. And fortunately, she didn't puncture me, but I was swollen and black and blue from my hip to my knee. So you don't always get puncture wounds when you have bad bites. But that was like a classic case of redirected aggression. If the guy had left, the dogs would have all calmed down. I would have waited a minute. I don't think we would have had any problems. So it can be, if it's a specific item the dog is very aggressive with. So for example, if you have a dog that's really aggressive at kids on tricycles, it might redirect aggress at you or another dog or something else the second it sees it. But in general, there's time of the dog building up that reactivity or agitation. All right. So that's everything I have in my notes. I don't blow my nose in front of people. Not that I know if it'll help, but now we can do questions. Jane, do you want to just call on people and give my voice a 3-second rest?
We can just go in order as I see. I don't know if you guys see it the same way, but Mega, do you want to go first?
So my question is would dogs generalize their aggression towards something? So if dogs were aggressive towards squeaky toys, would they then generalize that as they would become aggressive towards all toys?
In general, dogs do not generalize things. And particularly if I use squeaky toys as an example, squeaky toys will often agitate dogs or certain dogs. But in general, they don't generalize from one toy to another. If a dog resource guards a pig's ear, it will probably resource guard a bully stick or a raw bone. So then you're putting that in categories of high quality chew items, but it might not resource guard a chew hoof. So if you're dealing with food, it usually depends on how high value it is. And with toys, very uncommon, and squeaky toys are the most common type of toy that dogs will guard.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lexi, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So I was wondering, I was really interested in the body handling section, and I was just thinking about, so if you get a puppy and you in that window of opportunity, if you're touching it and things like that, I'm assuming it's less likely that they'll get body handling aggression unless they suffer some kind of trauma. Is that true? So typically would you see it in adopted dogs?
Yeah, you'd see it. So you're absolutely right. Caper was an anomaly. I've never had a puppy that didn't want to be handled.
Mhm.
Could hold him, but he just didn't like to be pet. And it was just as he got older that he became more comfortable with it. But what I tell everybody, and when I taught puppy classes, we used to play what I called pass the puppy. And so you'd have, like 6 people sitting in a circle and they'd pass their puppy. We wouldn't start this week 1. And the person, next to you would take your puppy and pet it all over while feeding it treats and stuff to even further advance exactly what you're talking about. When you first get a dog, even a rescue, you often have a window of opportunity where the dog won't show negative behaviors and will be more open to training, even if it has them. So even with a rescue dog, I would start handling it all over if I could,
Okay.
knowing that there still may end up being body handling aggression, but almost always if you start with a puppy and you like flip its ears over and you practice cleaning its ears and you pick up its feet, you start clipping its nails, those dogs tend to be fine with being handled all over.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Addie, do you want to go next?
Sure. My question was, it was in one of the readings, and you mentioned that like if the dog was in a dog park, and you bent down to pet another dog, that it was protective aggression and then redirected aggression if the dog, say like your dog attacked the dog you were petting. I was just wondering if you could further explain like how it was redirected aggression at the dog that you were petting.
I'd have to read it exactly, but in that situation, it would be redirected, simply meaning the dog, like I said, kind of about Wizard, the dog's getting agitated and you go to pet another dog. Are you sure it wasn't involved with a toy or a ball?
There was an example about, I think it was petting.
Okay.
I might have understood it wrong.
And I also haven't reread my own book in a long time, and so unfortunately I don't have the whole book memorized anymore.
Oh, it was in your reading for that you typed out today, the Word document. Sorry.
Did it have dog aggression in there? Do you remember what section it's in? Is it in the redirected aggression?
It was in.
I mean, you could get something like that where my dog's with me and I pet another dog. It would be more likely it could aggress at either the dog or me because I am petting the other dog. So my dog is agitated and not wanting me to pet the other dog, and I'm still petting it, and the dog could redirect and bite me, or redirect its quote unquote jealousy and bite the other dog. It definitely could happen. Like if my dog had a ball and another dog came near me to try and get the ball, and my dog dropped the ball and bit the other dog, it's guarding its ball, but it's redirecting the resource guarding by biting the other dog.
Okay.
I'll have to look at it again, or just even if you want, you can highlight it and email that to me, and I might be able to explain it better, unless somebody else remembers what she's saying and has a better answer. Yeah, sorry. I am going to be sending you guys some information on daycares and dog parks that I just realized, again, got skipped through everything we were doing.
Mm-hmm. So if a person was bent down to pet another dog and their dog bit that dog, would that be more so resource guarding or protective aggression?
Well, it would depend. If the dog had protective aggression, generalized, it would be my dog biting another dog because it was protecting me.
Mm-hmm.
It could be territorial aggression based on where we are. Like if my dog goes to the dog park every day, especially if it's not used to seeing this other dog, or it just considers the dog park that it's and the owners, it's me and my dog's dog park. Any dog coming into our space, a dog could redirect aggress at. And, you know, sometimes you can't always pinpoint precisely what type of aggression is, and sometimes it's overlapping. So you could have territorial aggression and you could have possessive aggression. I don't want my owner petting another dog, and so I'm going to aggress again, either at my owner, stop petting that other dog because I own you, or bite the other dog to make it go away so that my dog has me to itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
And one thing to remember, which I talked about, I hope I talked about in the general plan, but like I said, it's so, my notes are not written to be self-explanatory. And so it's so hard because as I get in the flow of lecturing, I fill in with all the things I know that need to be there. But you always want to remember that diagnosing the type of aggression is not essential. It helps pinpoint your training, but even if you can't differentiate between different types, or you really aren't sure what why the dog's being aggressive, you still treat it based on the symptoms.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't be more specific.
No, it was great. Thanks.
Rex, do you want to go next? Hello?
Rex?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So mine's also about protective aggression. So if your dog has protective aggression against like a member of the family, like say like the mom of the family, is it beneficial to like start separating them a little bit? Like if the dog sleeps on their bed, do you want to separate them, or would that just cause more stress for the dog?
Well, a lot of people think like, oh, you shouldn't let dogs sleep in your bed, or sleeping in the bed will cause more problems, which in and of itself isn't true. But if you have kids in the house that are likely to come into the bedroom unannounced in the middle of the night because they had a bad dream, you absolutely need the dog to be confined in a crate or tied in a corner of the bedroom so it can't reach the kid when the kid comes in the door. You never rely on the children to knock first and wait till mommy answers the door or daddy answers the door before you open it. So it depends, but yes, in general, like if let's say, you know, my dog sat next to me on the couch at like Lentil's a great example. He doesn't like to let anyone near me in my bed. And so sometimes I'll kick him off the bed if like Mihaela or Hallie want to sit on the end of my bed and chat. Or we're sitting together on the bed to watch a show and Lentil's just being obnoxious, then yeah, I'll kick him off the bed or off the couch. Dogs, because dogs can be prone to guarding resting areas, if you're combining the person that is the dog wants to, the person that is the dog is protective of, and then you add in a resting area, you will compound the level of aggression. And so in that case, yes, getting it off the couch, the bed. Sometimes you have to move its favorite bed into another room where you're not going to hang out with it. Sometimes you take beds away entirely. But on that note, an important thing to cover, which has more to do with resource guarding, is people will often think that if their dog resource guards the bed, then if they just pick up the bed, the dog won't resource guard it. The dog will just resource guard something else, or somewhere, a doorway, or a kitchen rug, or that kind of thing. So it's important when treating resource guarding that you don't just take away the object. But with children, I often don't want dogs sleeping in the bed, and often don't want dogs loose in the bedroom. So if the dog's crate trained and it'll sleep downstairs, great, or you teach it to sleep either in a crate in the bedroom or somewhere else.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kat, do you want to go next?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Wow, there's nothing I want to play more than Pass the Puppy. That's just like the best game. But I have a question about predatory aggression. You said that it's like best to never let that behavior, like the dog chasing the cat, to happen. Like in the Google Docs, it's all caps, like never let that happen. But you also said it's best for the cat to like whack the dog or like put the dog in its place. So how do you like have like that happen without the dog like chasing the cat?
Well, if an owner comes to me and the dog is already chasing the cat, I will often either ask them to videotape it, or I will have the dog on a 6-foot leash and have them bring the cat in the room so I can judge the level of intensity. And if the dog is already, you can tell by the way it's reacting towards that cat, you know, it gets the on the leash, it's scratching, it's barking, it's not calming, that's not safe to let that cat correct the dog. But if somebody calls me and they've just gotten the dog and they say, you know, the dog and the cat aren't really good together, I either in person or even sometimes on the phone can say, well, what happens when they come face to face? And the person, you know, if the person's like, oh, my cat hunches up and it starts hissing at the dog, but my dog won't go away, I'm like, if you think it's safe, maybe have a leash on the dog that you're stepping on or you're holding, but give it a minute. Excuse me. And if you think your cat's tenacious enough that it'll smack that dog in the face, then let it happen. But if somebody comes to me with a dog like Lentil with woodchucks, I already know there's no way I would let him loose with a cat. I mean, unfortunately, my partner has a cat, and Caper was fine with it. Falcon hates leaving the house, so Falcon never goes there with me. But Lentil, day one, he flew after that cat. The cat has a cat door that's in a window. It like sets at the bottom of the window. You close the window on top of it. That cat went flying out the door, and Lentil stayed under the window and was like, and trying to get out the cat door himself. I know I'm not going to try and let the cat correct the dog, but it's more likely to be when people contact me, if they contact me early enough, it's more like they just got the puppy or the dog. And if there's been no injury and it doesn't really present as injury, just as chasing, then I will say, well, it's mostly with puppies that I'll tell people, you know, like when I get my puppies, I had cats for years and I just can't afford to feed another mouth, so I haven't had them for years. But with all our puppies, we took them to houses where there were cats and just let the puppy loose with the cat. And if the dog started to chase, I might squirt it in the back end with a squirt bottle. I might distract it with a toy. But if it was puppy play, like, oh my God, what's that? What's that thing that's moving? And the cat's gonna, you know, and the person's like, the cat's not retreating and hiding under a bed, but the cat's standing there or jumps up on something and is on the table hissing down at the cat, then my goal would be to get the cat to claw the dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you're unsure, you always have to err on the side of don't let the dog chase it. And one of the reasons I talk about never letting the dog chase is because you don't want it rehearsing the behavior. Even on a really short leash, you don't want it to practice that lunge, growl reaction. But it's mostly with puppies where I'm pretty comfortable once I know the cat, like letting the cat do the job. And if you're not sure, or you own a breed that's really predatory, or you've walked it outside and it sees cats and treats them like squirrels, then those are all situations where you're not going to let the cat do its job. Does that answer it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paige, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I had a question about something you just said, like during this call. But if you're working with like resource guarding and you get to, like you said, the raw bones and like the dog just won't, like, you can't fix it, like, could you make that like a special, like in the crate treat or something? Or would that like just make your other training kind of like relapse?
No, I mean, you would want to double check it. So like, let's say you used that because it was like the best occupier you could. And then you get home and the dog will come running out and you can latch the crate shut even with the bone in it, and then, you know, let the dog out and so on, and then you pick up the bone when the dog's not there. That's fine. I always tell people, if you have a dog that resource guards, you want to practice for life, even once it's recovered. And resource guarding is one behavior that you're often able to actually cure. But I still tell people you should periodically make exchanges and make sure you can take things away. So, like, I almost gave this example when I was talking about it. If you have like a yard that you put your dog in, and you know, it's a beautiful sunny day and you just want your dog to be outside all day, and it'll go out there with the bone, but it will come in without the bone, or you can entice it away from the bone after it's had it for several hours. Again, that's a time where I would be okay using one. And definitely most dogs, if they're in a crate while you're not home or overnight, the first thing they're thinking about when they see you is to want to greet you and to go outside to the bathroom. And that's why you're often able to let the dog zoom out of the crate, you shut the crate door, and you take it away when the dog isn't standing there. And the other thing about raw bones is every dog I've ever owned that has raw bones has never needed their teeth cleaned or had teeth pulled. And that's, so I'm very into being able to feed them to my dogs. And like I said, if it backfires, then you're like, okay, can't do that anymore.
Do you think it would make them like more protective of the crate?
Not necessarily. I mean, with the bone in it, potentially, but if at no other time they guard the crate, it kind of, the crate goes with the bone. It's like, yeah, the dog will guard the bone, and I'm giving the dog the bone. So it's going to guard the crate while the bone is in there. But as soon as the bone is gone and the dog goes in and it licks everything it can, and it, you know, searches endlessly and there's no bone, then it has no reason to guard the crate. Where I would be careful is like if I gave it in the yard, and then, you know, I would most likely encourage people, when the dog is in the house, go pick up the bone and either put it back in the freezer or toss it out, so that you can, you know, if you go out to poop or scoop, or you go out to get the dog, there's no harm. There's no concern that the dog is, you know, hidden it somewhere that you don't notice, and you get near it and the dog starts to get aggressive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Colleen, do you want to go next?
So in the notes, you said that with the emergency down, it takes time and is doable, but it's also breed appropriate. What exactly did you mean by that?
So if you have a breed either that's much harder to train, less responsive to training, so like a lot of hound dogs, you're just genetically going to have less reliability and potentially less ability to train it because it's a really hard behavior. And then the other thing would be its predisposition to whatever it aggresses at. So I don't know if I could ever teach Lentil to do an emergency down with a woodchuck, but I could get all my other dogs probably to do an emergency down with any rodent. Mm-hmm. So in that case, we're dealing with genetics that we just can't defy those genetics in some breeds. And then, you know, you get breeds that nothing's coming to mind right off, but like if you have a dog that's just really easily distracted, like a lot of pointers, they're very sensitive to the outdoors because of hunting, and they're looking for birds all the time. And so you're teaching that dog to hold a downstay, but you can't really train it with birds. You know what I mean? Like you might be able to go into PetSmart or Petco and do a little bit of training, but your ability to control birds is very minimal. And that would be an example of, you might not ever be able to get a pointer to hold a downstay like that, because it sees a bird, it gets up, but then it goes and misbehaves with whatever you've been training it not to misbehave with.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kiara, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I have a question about resource guarding with the food bowl. Uh, so you wrote that you need to always pick up the bowl after after they've eaten. Is that to keep it out of their reach or to keep it out of their sight?
It's to keep them from guarding an empty bowl.
Why would they guard it if it's empty though?
Because that's where their food goes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the dog, it even though it's empty, it's still where the food goes, and many dogs guard empty bowls. Many dogs don't, but when you have a dog that resource guards its food bowl, it's much safer to pick up the bowl and potentially, if you've completely cured it, like I said, resource guarding can be cured, then it would be fine. But most dogs that guard their bowl guard it even if it's empty.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other last questions? All right, well, I appreciate you coming to class. It means a lot to me as your instructor that you take the time to do it. And we will plan on 4 o'clock again next week, and that'll be our last class. All right. Take care. Jane and I are going to stay and do more work, but you guys are all free to go. 9:15, class dismissed. Good to see you.
Jamie, I have a personal question.
Okay,
So-
hang on. I'm going to just stop recording.
Okay.